This is my family. There's something I've always admired about my dad in the center. By the age of 30, he's already spent 9 years of his life in medical training. And he was on his way to a 30-year career as a family physician. He was so good as a doctor, and he saved hundreds of lives. And whenever I needed some help as well, he was always able to help me, no matter what health illness or ailment was bothering me. For some reason and somehow, he knew exactly how to diagnose my illness and tell me the exact next steps. I often wondered, how much did you have to study and focus and memorize to be able to diagnose whatever condition I had? I was always in awe at that. In many ways, you could say my dad was very deep in that single area. This is my cousin, Bridju. I just got married 6 months ago to my wife, and he was my best man. I've always admired my cousin as well, but for the exact opposite reason as my dad. You see, Bridju, by the age of 40, and get your pens out, he has done so many things in his life. He started off as an engineer in Ottawa. Then he became a sales executive in San Francisco. He moved to London and was a stage actor. He moved to Paris and was a chef. Then he quit all of that and became a snowboard operator in the Alps. He's been a Hindu disciple in the Himalayas. He's been a community organizer in New York. He's been a private pilot in Toronto. And most recently, he's a blogger in Vietnam. So I ask you, who would you rather be? Like my dad or like my cousin? When I talk to them both, they both have a tinge of regret as well. My dad, he's lived very comfortably, but he's the first to tell you that he didn't see the happiness and the freedom that he thought he would. He's always been interested in dabbling in many, many different areas. Politics, international relations, physics, charity work. But he never found the time. In many ways, he was shackled by his depth. When I talk to my cousin, he's had so many experiences that it's enriched his life and the relationships all around him. He's found a way to connect with almost every single soul I've ever met. But in the process of doing so many things over the course of 20 years of his adult life, he's never gone deep in one area. And he's always said, Matt, I'm looking for my life's calling. And so in many ways, the fact that he was so broad actually limited his ability to go deep and find his calling. So again, I ask you, who would you rather be? I know for myself that I didn't want to be just focused on one thing like my dad. I'm not wired that way. At the same time, I wondered, should I be like my cousin Bridju, broad across many things? But I was always worried about the stereotype you get of being scattered. What was the path for someone like me, like the rest of us? Is there a middle way? What I want to share with you is that there is. Go broad. Going broad gives you a unique perspective on the world around you. It makes you more innovative, collaborative, and adaptable. But going broad shouldn't be a random path that you take. It should be guided with purpose and designed with intention. What I found was that the best people who went broad did so effectively. They didn't be superficial across many different areas. They chose several areas to go deep in over the course of their career. In that way, they weren't a jack of all trades and master of some. Sorry, they weren't a jack of all trades, master of none. They were a jack of all trades and master of some. So I started to ask people for career advice. How could I become this jack of all trades and master of some? And everyone told me that I should pick one thing and focus. They told me I should be just like my dad. And that advice didn't sit well with me. Why did we live in a world sold on depth? When did we become convinced that the route to excellence is through deep specialization? Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, popularized the 10,000-hour rule, seeing obsessive focus and time commitment and determination as a means to realizing your potential. It's true in education as well. Technical expertise in sciences, technology, engineering, and math have become all the rage. Meanwhile, you see the majors, humanities majors halving over the last 45 years, and liberal arts colleges on the decline. We see higher education as a vocational training exercise, a conveyor belt to pump out specialists. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need specialists. I want to know that my pilot has flown thousands of hours. I want to know that my surgeon has completed hundreds of similar surgeries. And of course, I want to know that the person who built my home had built countless other homes. But it seems like the obsession with depth has gone well beyond that. It has become the central premise for how we organize our society and the major sectors within it, business, government, and the nonprofit sectors. It is a recipe for disaster. One reason why is deeply specializing is unnatural. Humans are inherently broad. We need so many skills just to live life. It's what we would naturally do if we weren't schooled to go so deep. Robert Twigger, the British poet and author, said, "Our age reveres the specialist." But humans are natural polymaths, at our best when we turned our minds to many things. Second reason, the future of work is not in line with specialization. Oxford University put out a study saying that almost 50% of jobs in the US alone will be susceptible to automation in the next 20 years, including in the transport sectors, including in the service sectors and office sectors. Now, as technology races ahead, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do humans race? How do humans race ahead and beat technology? It's not going to be by competing on deep expertise and technical specialization. It's going to be through the acquisition of broad, creative, and social skills. Lastly, some of the most complex problems and the most pressing problems facing our society will not be solved in silos. Think about some of the biggest issues facing our world today. Think about aging populations and skyrocketing healthcare costs. Think about financial system stability and income inequality. Think about climate change and extreme weather preparedness. No single sector, institution, or individual alone can solve these problems. We need collaboration across the sectors and across the disciplines. And people who are broad across these areas will be best capable of addressing these complex problems. Now, the kind of change we're talking about will require people within the system to trust each other. And we know trust is best developed through empathy. And how do you develop empathy? It's often said you want to live in someone else's shoes. And so by definition, being broad means you'll have more shared experiences, certainly more than someone who is deep in just one area. Empathy guided a lot of my life as well. When I was younger, my dad unwittingly put all of our life savings into Nortel Networks, a huge technology company in the late 1990s. In 2001, the company spectacularly crashed, and we lost all of our savings, and so did so many families around Canada and the world. And I vowed to dedicate my life to make the financial system more sustainable, more equitable, and less volatile, so no one could go through what we went through as a family. But instead of running away from business and bashing it, I thought I needed to understand it and work in it from the inside. And so what I ended up doing was taking my first job as an investment banker at Morgan Stanley. And my second act was as a financial crisis policy analyst within the Department of Finance in Ottawa. I went from calculating share price returns for specific companies to writing briefing memos to the Minister of Finance about the global capital markets. I went from working in a small, flat, and entrepreneurial office to what was a massive, hierarchical, and conservative bureaucracy. And boy, like, the cultures were so different. I was making mistakes left, right, and center. I kept on using the wrong skills that I learned at Morgan Stanley. Those things weren't relevant at the Department of Finance. I kept on speaking the wrong words. I kept on speaking the wrong language. And I was certainly leveraging all of the wrong networks. What I realized was I wasn't prepared to fit into the government culture. It was hard to fit in. It was hard to adapt. And it was certainly the case that they weren't prepared for someone like me who was so entrepreneurial, who had a different vision for how to create public value in the world. Now, I wasn't as depressed. There were some magic moments that happened as well when we were talking about regulation of hedge funds and bank capital. And when those moments of magic happened, when we found the intersection between the public and private sectors, it made it all the more clear why we needed to be broad. So I started looking for more examples. Could I find people who had successfully gone broad, been effective in adapting to all these different cultures? Later on, I was at McKinsey & Company, and my colleague and I, Nick Lovegrove, interviewed 150 people who had successfully gone broad. And we looked at what made it work for them. And here's what we found. We live on a spectrum between being broad and being deep. And in this spectrum, everyone has a point along the way. Every choice you make in life, whether it's what event you're attending tonight or what course you pick, to what jobs you do, to what newspapers you read, you make a choice of going one way or the other along that spectrum. Now everyone has what we call a sweet spot, the point along that spectrum at which you're very effective at addressing complex issues, but also extremely satisfied and fulfilled with the range of your activities and interests. In that way, finding that sweet spot makes you the jack of all trades and master of some. Sheryl Sandberg is an amazing example of a broad leader who had made several choices. She's now the chief operating officer of Facebook. But she didn't start off in the technology or even the business industry. She started off a career in government, working first at the World Bank and then at the United States Department of Treasury as the chief of staff to the Secretary of the Treasury. She worked in government for several years. And what did she do there? She found a way to navigate the 100,000-person bureaucracy, manage public policy files on a range of different issues, and of course, build the very transferable skills of communications, management, and operations. When her time came up in government in about 2001, she could have gone almost anywhere else in government, but she wanted to pivot to outside of her comfort zone. She chose to try to work in the technology industry in Silicon Valley. She spoke to many different CEOs, and one in particular said, "Sheryl, we'd never hire someone like you. People in government can't work in technology." Well, she proved them wrong. Google was the first company to take a bet on Sheryl, made her their VP of Sales and Operations. That worked out well for her and for the company. No wonder Mark Zuckerberg, the current CEO of Facebook, wanted to hire Sheryl. She had such broad experiences across so many different geographies, sectors, and issues. And yet, she was also extremely deep when it came to the functional capabilities needed to advance Facebook and scale it to 1 billion users. She said, "For 14 years later, I still love working in tech. It was not my original plan, but I got there eventually. If you find yourself on one path but longing for another, find that path." You see, these are big choices that Sheryl made, and it may seem that being broad is exclusively about these big choices. It may seem you have to make life-changing career decisions, transforming your life and those around you. But there are many small steps you can take every day, week, and month, too. My friend Zane is another example. He's actually a medical student, was a medical student here at Western Ontario. He was becoming a gastroenterology specialist. One day he had a patient who was severely sick, dangerously sick, and wasn't getting better. Every treatment they tried wasn't working. So in a last-ditch effort, they tried a new treatment that was unconventional. She had a lot of bad bacteria in her intestinal tract. And they said, through a fecal transplant, can we take someone's good bacteria and inject it into her bad bacteria? And the good bacteria won, and it saved her life. And Zane was wondering, why is this an unconventional treatment? When he looked at the facts, he found that the fecal transplant had 90% success rates, and that over 30,000 people in the United States die every single year from this illness. He saw that there was a patchwork of regulations and public health issues that prevented this from becoming commonplace. And so he was at a crossroads. Do I continue being a practitioner and do things the old way? Or do I pivot to something brand new and try to build a new way of conducting medicine in this field? Everyone advised him, stick to being a doctor, stay on the conveyor belt. But he dared to go broad. He went off the track and took his master's in public health. Along the way, he met two founders of a nonprofit stool bank, or what he affectionately likes to call a poop bank. And he became their first chief medical officer. At the stool bank, they are making fecal transplants much easier, cheaper, and safer to do. And in the last 2 years alone, they've now treated 7,000 patients across 450 hospitals, 6 countries. They've saved the US healthcare system over $30 million and growing. And now 94% of all Americans can get a fecal transplant within 4 hours' drive. Those are big public health wins. And think about the impact he had. Zane never thought he would be helping to run a poop bank. But when we asked him, how do you feel about it now? He said, this is not the journey I anticipated, but as I look back, I couldn't imagine it any other way. That reminded me so much of a speech that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford in 2005 to the commencement. There he talked about at the age of 17, dropping out of college and dropping into calligraphy classes only because he found it so fascinating. He thought that there was no practical application for calligraphy, But 10 years later, when he was designing the Mac with Steve Wozniak, they brought all of that in. Beautiful typefaces, proportionally spaced fonts. Steve Jobs said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will connect in your future. If you ask most people what they want to do with their lives, most will not be able to tell you the answer with 100% certainty. So what I want to offer are 3 small steps you can take to effectively go broad, to find that passion. It is certainly greater than just staying in your lane. First, consume new knowledge. If you're an engineer, read the Nonprofit Quarterly. If you're a social worker, read the Harvard Business Review. And if you are a philosophy or historian major, read People magazine. As you start to immerse yourself in the literature and the vocabulary of other areas, not only will you expand your interests, but you'll also start to develop the capacity for innovation. 2, build your network. If you're a science major, talk to journalist students. If you're a policymaker, talk to entrepreneurs. As you engage with people who think very differently than you, you'll start to see opportunities for collaboration and cross-pollination emerge. And lastly, transfer your skills. So if you're, say, really good at accounting, but you want to get involved in community issues, find a nonprofit organization and offer to balance their books. If you are very good at writing, but want to join the technology sector, start a technology blog and start reviewing the products of new companies that are coming out into the marketplace. Every small step you take towards breadth will increase the range of opportunities and experiences you have and get you closer on your way to finding what truly does drive you. For those of us who aren't, we don't know the single area we want to focus on, and that's a lot of us, don't listen to that pressure to specialize, especially too early. It is okay to want to do multiple things in your career. In fact, what we want you to do is to be broad. It gives you a unique perspective on the world around you. It helps you be more innovative, collaborative, and adaptable. As Louis Pasteur, the French scientist, said, in the fields of observation, chance favors only the prepared mind. So go broad and maximize your impact. Thank you.